Chapter 7. What happened after that was my idea. I admit it. The buck stops with Ellie. It came out of being so restless, feeling that we weren't doing enough, weren't making a difference. I'd always thought that there must be a route out the other side of hell, using the creek as a path. After all, it had to run somewhere, and it couldn't go uphill. In the next valley was the Holloway River and Ridson. I had no idea if the route would be passable for humans, but I thought it was worth a try. I longed for new friends, new scenes, new people maybe. It was like wanting a holiday. Despite what the radio and our own common sense told us, there was some vague feeling that things would be different there, that we would walk out of the mountains into a new green land, a peaceful land, leaving the ugliness and despair of Wirrawee behind. I didn't tell others of my dream. I just said we needed to establish a line of retreat and that it might be important for us to find out what was happening in the Holloway. Knowledge is power, after all. They were quite keen. They didn't need much persuading. Homer had suggested a few times that we needed to find more people, to meet up with other groups, and there was a chance we could do that in Ridson. Besides, I suppose we were all ready to try something new. It helped us feel that we were being constructive. Only Chris wanted to stay behind. It was useful to have someone stay back, to look after the chooks and the remaining lamb. But I wasn't sure if leaving Chris alone was a good idea. He was becoming increasingly solitary, writing in his notepad and sitting on his own, gazing at the cliffs. He drank all the beer we got from the Kings, I think, because when I looked for it, I couldn't find it, and Lee said he didn't know where it had gone. But there was no more grog then, as far as I knew, and I thought maybe that had put him in a bad mood. Occasionally he had bursts of activity. For instance, he built us a good big woodshed for keeping our firewood dry. That took him 3 days, and he wouldn't let anyone help him. But once he'd finished it, he didn't know much more. We knew we might be away for a few nights if we did get down through to Ridson, so we packed proper backpacks with sleeping bags and jumpers and japaras. Instead of tents, we took a few flies and ground sheets, which were lighter and good enough for what we wanted. There was a big argument about how to walk the creek. Homer, who was gradually returning to his usual assertive self, said we should wear boots because we'd be less likely to slip on the rocks. I said we should use bare feet so our boots would be dry and warm when we finally got out of the creek. Walking through that cold water for a long distance, with autumn coming on fast, wasn't something that appealed to any of us. But that argument led on to the one we should have had ages ago, the one about Homer taking guns on the Buttercup Lane ambush. It went like this. Homer said something typically domineering like, "Well, I'm wearing my boots. I don't care what the rest of you do." I said, "Great, and when you get blisters, we'll have to carry you, I suppose." "Homer, if we don't look after our feet, we'll be good for nothing." "Yes, Mother," he said, flashing his brown eyes at me. I've always had this feeling with Homer that I must never back off or it'll be the end of me. He's so strong and he intimidates so many people. And when I think he despises them, and I think he despises them because they're too weak to stand up to him. So I always stand up to him, and did it again this time. How come when I tell people what I think they should do, you make comments like, "Yes, Mother," and when you tell people what you expect them to, when you tell people what to do, you expect them to jump into action? You wouldn't be just a tiny bit sexist, would you, Homer? That was like asking a fish if it was a tiny bit wet. "Ellie, I know you hate it when you don't get your own way on every little thing." "Oh yes? And when's the last time I got my own way on anything?" "Uh-oh, you're asking me. Try this morning at breakfast when you stopped Chris lighting the fire. Try 2 hours ago when you wouldn't let Lee open a can of peaches. Yeah, and you noticed something about both those times? I'm trying to do the right thing by us, by this group. I'm trying to keep us alive. If anyone sees smoke out of here, we're dead. If we pig out on all the food, we're in big trouble. I'm not just saying stuff for my own sake, because I like to hear my own voice, you know. We ought to listen to others more, Ellie. We ought to listen to others more, Ellie. You keep wanting to be a one-man band." Now I was really mad. "Thanks very much. I never want to be a one-man band. A one-woman one, maybe. You're just proving what I said before. And by the way, this is pretty good coming from you. You're the moron who secretly cut down the shotguns and secretly took them with you after we agreed we wouldn't have firearms. You put our lives at risk, Homer. by being a one-man band, and you did it in cold blood. I've never done anything like that. You're so sure you're right on every little thing. You don't care what anyone else thinks. And I was right, wasn't I? Chris and I'd be dead now if I hadn't had those guns. All of us might be dead. I saved your life, Ellie. Hey, I'm a hero. Trust you to cash in just because you got a lucky call. You were so bloody lucky, Homer. You haven't even started to figure it out yet. If those blokes had taken their rifles with them when they went out into the bush, there's no way you'd have had time to get your precious shotgun out. I had it in my hand, Ellie. I'm not that slow. I was ready. And suppose the patrol had jumped us. Suppose we'd been caught with sawn-off shotguns. We'd have been put against a tree and shot, and you'd have 5 people's blood on your hands. But that didn't happen, did it? That proves I was right. That doesn't prove anything. That was a fluke. No, because of the fact that it didn't happen proves that we'd covered ourselves properly. There's no such thing as a fluke. It's like that golfer said, good players always have the luck. As long as we keep being careful and smart, we'll keep being lucky. I don't believe in flukes. I figured all this out because I decided to take the guns. Homer, you're crazy. Anything could have happened out there. Don't believe in flukes? You don't understand life. It's all flukes. You're acting like you can control everything. You think you're God. Geez, even in golf, the ball can hit a tree and bounce off into the hole. How do you explain that? Anyway, that's not the point, I said quickly, in case he could explain it. The point is, you've got to go along with the group decisions. You can't ignore us and do what you want. We're all in this together. Don't go calling me a one-man band. You're not only the band, you're the roadies as well. Break it up, guys, Chris said. The others had been reacting to us in their different ways. Robin had been standing leaning into a mattock, watching and listening with great interest. Fee, who hated conflict, had gone off to our current dunning, 50 metres away in the bush. Lee was reading a book called Red Shift and had not even looked up. Chris had been whittling a piece of wood into the shape of a dragon. He'd been doing a lot of stuff like that lately, and he was getting really good at it. But he looked upset and angry at the way we were fighting, and a few minutes after he interrupted us, he went off to the creek. While the rest of us started getting organised for the expedition, I was packing in a bit of rage, throwing things around, growling at everyone. It wasn't until Fee came back from the dunny that I calmed down a bit. Well, to be more accurate, she calmed me down. She picked up a stick that I'd knocked over, one that we'd used for drying clothes, and tried to put it back in its position. One end of it sat in the fork of a tree, and she couldn't quite reach it, so I went to give her a quick lift. To my horror, she flinched slightly as I grabbed at her. It was only the slightest movement, but for that second she looked as though she thought I was going to hit her. "Oh, Fee," I said. "I was really upset." I'm sorry, Ellie," she said. "You just took me by surprise, that's all." I sat down on the ground beside the tent and crossed my legs. "Fee, have I turned into a monster?" "No, Ellie, of course you haven't. There's just so much happening. It's hard to get used to it all." "Have I changed a lot?" No, Ellie. You're a strong person, and whenever you have strong people around, you have fireworks." I mean, Homer's strong, and Robin's strong, and Lee's much stronger than people realise, so there's bound to be clashes. Everyone's strong in different ways. I didn't think Kevin was strong until he drove off with Corrie to the hospital. You were so tough when we blew up the bridge. I'm not strong with people, though. Do you still hate me for what I wrote about you in Homer? No, of course not. It was just a shock when I read it, that's all. Your trouble is you're too honest, and that was the shock. You wrote down things that most people think but never say, or else people write them in their diaries and never show anyone. But you and Homer still got it back together. But you and Homer still haven't got it back together. No, but I don't know if that was because of what you wrote. He's so difficult. Some days he's so loving and beautiful, and other days he treats me like I don't exist. It's very frustrating. Sometimes, like I had a lot of significant conversations. It seemed like I had a lot of significant conversations that day. Maybe it was the fact that we were on a move that got everyone talking suddenly. The last one was with Chris, and that was even tougher than the one with Homer. I went down the creek deliberately to find him because I felt guilty about neglecting him lately. The more morose he became, the more I avoided him. Everyone did. And I suppose that just made him worse. So St. Ellie decided to fix things, and away she went. determined to do something good for once. I found him sitting on a rock, looking at his left foot, which was bare. For a moment I couldn't see what he was looking at, but then I saw this nasty black bulge on his skin, like a long, ugly blood blister. I looked at it, shuddered, looked again, and realised it was a leech. Chris was sitting there calmly, watching it grow fat on his blood. Yuck, I said. What are you doing that for? He shrugged. Passes the time. He didn't even look up. No, seriously, why? This time he didn't answer at all. For the whole time we were talking, the leech stayed there, getting bigger and blacker. It made it hard to have a conversation. I couldn't take my eyes off it, but I tried. Can you make sure you check the eggs behind that flat rock? Blossom's been laying there occasionally. Blossom was a rather depressed-looking red hen who wasn't popular with the other chooks. Sure. So how are you going to spend the time while we're away? I don't know. I'll find things. Chris, are you okay? Like, you seem so off these days. Do you hate us all or something? Is something getting you down? No, I'm fine. But we used to talk. We used to have these great conversations. How come we don't do that anymore? I don't know. Nothing to talk about. So much is happening. We're in the middle of the biggest thing that we'll ever see in our whole lives. So much is happening. He shrugged again, not lifting his eyes from the foul. He shrugged again, not lifting his eyes from the foul slug on his leg. I'd love to see more of your writing, your poetry. He gazed at the leech for a long time, but without answering. Finally he said, Yeah, I liked what you said about the other ones. Then, as if he were talking to himself, he added, Maybe I should. Maybe yes, maybe no. He turned and stretched out past me to get something from his jacket, which was lying on a rock. Mechanically I picked it up and handed it to him. As I did so, I smelt again the stale, sweet smell of alcohol on his breath. So he did have a secret collection of grog somewhere. He pulled out a box of matches. He seemed to be ignoring me. I felt flat and dispirited. I'd been in a better mood after talking to Fee, but that was lost again. I could hear Robin yelling for me. Our expedition was ready to move out. Well, see you, I said to Chris, in a couple hours or a couple of days. He didn't even answer. I slouched off up the hill, grabbed my pack and headed for the point where the creek slid under the thick growth of bush, the route to the hermit's cabin and beyond. Finn, Homer and Lee were already there. Only Robin had waited for me. I took off my boots and socks. We agreed on a compromise, to wear boots and keep our socks dry. So I put the boots back on and followed the others into the cold water. Was this trip a good idea? I couldn't decide, but I didn't care all that much. It was something to do, and if we were careful, we couldn't come to much harm, except for frostbite, I thought, as I felt the water trickling around my toes. And leeches. I kept glancing down nervously to make sure they weren't making sneak attacks on me. We passed a little old cabin and kept going. We were in new territory now. It didn't take long to get quite uncomfortable, bent over, slipping on rocks, getting pain up my legs from my freezing feet. I grunted and grumbled my way along. I kept trying to move the pack on my back into new positions, feeling more like a tortoise with every passing minute. This is a tough way to earn a living, I said to Robin's bum. She laughed. I think that's what she did anyway. Turning her head a little, she said back to me, Hey, El, do yabbies bite? Yeah, count your toes every time we stop. They're hungry little critters. And dragonflies? Them too. Bunyips? They're the worst of the lot. We had to duck even lower as undergrowth pulled at our hair. It was the end of the conversation for a while. We went on like that for a long time. Once I got into a routine, it wasn't so bad. There's those first few minutes when you're sweating and in pain, and then it becomes kind of a rhythm, and you go on and you go with the flow. It's happening inside you and outside you, but the first intensity wears off, luckily. So I plodded along, following Robin, who was following Lee, who was following Fee, who was following Homer. Sometimes the creek widened and rippled over gravel, which was nice and easy. Sometimes I slipped onto smooth rocks or felt pressure of sharp stones. Sometimes we had to clamber around deep pools. In one place the creek flowed straight and dark for about 80 metres with a sandy bottom, and we were able to walk along with our heads up as though we were on a highway. I'd always thought of hell as being a basin, a bowl, but I had no real evidence of that. From Taylor's Ditch, the far side of Hill looked to be a ridge of rock and trees, a lot lower than Taylor's. It certainly gave the impression of forming one side of a basin, with Mount Turner the only real high point, but beyond that was Holloway Valley. The creek had to reach there somehow. We slogged away for 2 hours, losing height most of the time. I was wondering if I'd be able to stand straight again, or if I'd been locked into this position forever, a hunchbacked monster from the bush. Suddenly I realised that Robin's bum had swung around and was going away from me. In fact, it was rising, leaving the creek. I glanced up from under my pack. Robin was clambering out of water to join the others who were sprawled along a bank, pulling off their boots, groaning as they tried to rub their legs back into life. We were in a clear length of bush for the first time since leaving our campsite. There were only a few metres of flat, but it was enough. There was even some warm sunlight to lie in. The thick canopy of trees was broken and we could see a clear, pale blue sky. This is nice, Robin said. Thank God it was here, I said. I couldn't have gone much further. That was one mother of a paddle. Whose idea was this anyway? Yours, came 4 voices, on cue. I pulled off my saturated boots and looked around as I rubbed my feet and legs. The creek flowed on without us, but it changed its tune a little further down. I could hear a wider, louder, lonelier sound. And through the trees was more sunlight, a blue light background. And through the trees was more sunlight, a light blue background instead of a thick green and brown one. Walking like a hospital patient on the first day out of bed, I hobbled along to the end of the clearing, followed by Homer. We went a few metres into the belt of trees and stood looking. There was the Holloway Valley. To a lot of people I suppose it wouldn't have been beautiful. It had been a dry summer, and although the river flats were a soft green, the paddocks beyond Ridson had burnt off into the ochre sameness that seemed part of my life, part of me. The lush green of our springs and early summers never lasted long. I was more used to that dry, monotonous yellow, so used to it that at some stage it had soaked into me, till I wasn't sure if there were boundaries between me and the landscape anymore. I remember Mr. Cassar at school saying he'd come home after living a year in England, and his heart had ached with love when he saw the sunburnt plains again. I knew what he meant. Boy, did I know what he meant. Even the yellow wasn't all yellow, of course. There were dark green dots of trees and lines of windbreaks. The flashing of galvanised iron roofs, like little square pools of water. The tanks and sheds of stock yards and dams. The endless boring fences. It was my country, even more than the bush and the mountains, and definitely more than the cities and towns. I felt at home in those hot, rustling paddocks. But between us and the valley were a line of cliffs and a line of bush. We skirted around Mount Turner without even realising it. And it was now quite a way over to my left. Homer and I were standing at the brink of one of the lowest cliffs, where the creek trickled over the edge in a long thin stream, falling to rocks 50 metres below, and then gurgling away into the undergrowth again. The bush down there looked as thick as the stuff that we had come through in hell. Lucky Kevin isn't here, Homer said, gazing down at it. Eh? How do you work that out? Don't you know, he's terrified of heights. God, is there anything that guy isn't afraid of? And he always acted so tough. Guess he'd come through in the end, but guess he did. We went back to the others and told them what we'd seen. We left our packs and went for a walk along the cliffs, looking for a way down. Short of bungee jumping, Lee said, after 10 minutes. We've got to be able to get back up again, said Robin, always practical. The cliffs were fast becoming impassable in this direction, crowded by trees, breaking away in a few places, and with some dangerously slippery sheets of rock. We gave up and tried the other way, passing the creek again, and striking out across some more bare patches of shale. We found only one possibility, a tree which had fallen headfirst down the cliff and died there. Its bare white skeleton now leaned against a wall of rock, branches and like bones, stuck Branches like bones stuck out on all the sides, a kind of natural stepladder. "Golly," said Fee in her grandmotherly voice as we stood there and gazed down at it. "No way," said Lee. "I don't see why not," Robin said. I don't have medical insurance," Lee said. "We should have bought some rope," Homer said. "We should have bought an escalator." "I think it's possible," I said, "if someone does it without their pack on first. And if that works, we can think about getting the packs down." They all looked at me as I said that, and they kept looking at me after I'd finished. I started to feel uncomfortable. "Whose idea was it we came on this trip?" Homer asked again. They kept looking at me. I sighed and began to take my pack off. It was my imagination, or did they press closely around me as they escorted me to the edge of the cliff? Seems like I had the proverbial 2 chances of getting out of this, Buckley's and none. I got down on all fours and began sliding backwards over the edge. "Hang on to my hands," Homer said. "There's no point. If we can only get down there by holding on to people, then what does the last person do?" The top of the tree was about 3 meters below, but I thought I could reach it. The edge of the cliff was rounded, not sheer, and my biggest problems were the loose gravel and the need to connect my feet with the top of the tree. With few instructions from Robin, I lined myself up, then hung at full stretch for a few seconds. I needed to take a leap of faith, a slide of faith anyway. I took a breath, swallowed, and let go. The slide only took a second, but there was that horrible long thought that I might miss the tree and slide forever. I pressed myself into the gravel harder and grabbed at the rock face with my fingers. Then my feet hit the broken trunk, and almost immediately my legs were wrapping around it. I let myself slip a little further and hugged the old white wood with my arms as well, closing my eyes and resting my face against it. "Are you okay?" Robin called. "Sure." I opened my eyes. "I'm just not thinking about getting back up again." I looked down, searching for a place to rest my feet. The spikes of wood were arranged neatly below me, all the way to the bottom. It seemed pretty straightforward. I put my left foot down to the first spike and rested my weight on it, straightening a little in relief. The branch immediately stopped. I hugged the tree again, as advice started pouring down on top of my head. "Keep your feet close to the trunk. Don't put all your weight on one branch. Test the branches first." They were sensible enough suggestions, but I could have figured them out for myself. I could feel the sweat starting to make my shirt sticky and my forehead hot. I gritted my teeth and searched for the next branch. By keeping my feet so close to the trunk that the soles of my boots were twisted against it, I made progress. Boots weren't ideal for this kind of work, but they were all I had. It took me 5 minutes. It felt like 15, but at last I was standing, wild with relief, at the base of the trunk, my back to the bush. "Come on," I yelled. "What about the packs?" "Put the fragile things in your pockets and chuck the packs down." And that's what they did. We didn't have many fragile items: torches, radio, a pair of binoculars. Then I had to dodge the falling packs. I'm sure they weren't aiming them at me. I'm quite sure they weren't. And I resisted a temptation to set fire to the trunk as they gingerly worked their way down it, one by one. "We'll have to pick up a bit of rope somewhere," Homer said, when we're all standing a bit breathless at the bottom. "From Ridson, maybe. It'll help us get back up." There was no path through the bush, and the trees were packed tightly. It was going to be a grunt. We went over a ridge, found a bit of a gap along a line of rock, and followed it until it ran out. After that we just had to struggle on. It took about an hour to travel a kilometre. "I'd rather be back in the creek," I said to Fee. And that's when we heard the voices.